The community hall was calm that afternoon, the kind of calm that comes before people arrive for an event. A few chairs were stacked along the walls, some lights were still warming up, and a dusty upright piano stood quietly near the corner. It looked ordinary, a little old, but not forgotten. Workers setting up the hall barely paid attention to it. They were busy moving tables, testing microphones, and preparing the space for the weekend gathering. In the middle of all this movement, a boy stood near the piano. He wasn't the kind who drew attention. He kept his shoulders slightly bent, not out of fear but out of habit, like someone used to avoiding too many eyes. He had come early because his teacher had asked for extra help with simple tasks, placing programs on chairs, taping signs on walls, and checking if everything looked neat. While he was doing these tasks quietly, the organizer called out to him. The organizer was an older man with a kind face, someone who didn't rush, even when things were busy. He pointed toward the piano and asked in a calm voice if the boy could test it. They just needed to make sure the keys weren't sticking and that the sound wasn't too soft. It was a basic request, something small that didn't need skill. The boy walked toward the piano slowly. He wasn't sure why he had been asked. He had never told anyone there that he could play. He didn't think he was good enough to talk about it. Playing was something he did at home when he had time, usually alone, usually late in the evening when the world felt quiet. He had never shown much interest in playing in front of others because he always thought someone else could play better. He sat on the bench and placed his hands gently on the keys. The organizer went back to directing others and didn't watch him. Most people in the hall didn't even notice he was sitting there. They were talking to each other, laughing, dragging chairs, and adjusting speakers. No one waited for anything special. The boy pressed a single key. It sounded a little sharp, but clear. He pressed another, then another, testing the way he had been asked. He knew he could just play a simple scale and be done with it. That was all they wanted. It would take only a few seconds. He could go back to folding programs and keeping out of the way. But as he touched the keys, something inside him shifted. It wasn't excitement or pride. It was something softer, something like a small door opening in his heart without warning. The sound of the keys reminded him of the quiet moments he spent at home, when the world felt distant and calm. He remembered the feeling of losing himself in small melodies, in the way notes blended and moved like gentle waves. He took a slow breath. The people behind him kept talking, unaware that he was even still sitting there. He looked down at the keys, his fingers resting lightly as if waiting for permission. He didn't know why the idea came to him, but it did. Maybe he should play a little more than a simple scale. Not a full song, not something loud or show, it's just a small melody that lived in his mind. He didn't plan anything. He didn't think long about it. He just started. His fingers pressed the first notes, soft and careful. The melody he played was something he had learned without sheet music, something he had shaped slowly over many evenings. It wasn't perfect or polished, but it was honest. The notes flowed gently, blending into one another like quiet footsteps on a wooden floor. No one noticed at first. The music was soft, almost like part of the air. People kept moving chairs and talking. A group near the far wall was discussing where to place the food table. Someone tested a microphone, creating a brief, sharp sound that echoed. But the boy kept playing. The sound returned to calm. The organizer walked past the piano and paused for a moment. He didn't interrupt. He only slowed down his steps, listening without making it obvious. The melody caught him off guard. It wasn't the kind of playing he expected from a boy who usually stayed quiet. It wasn't the kind someone played just to test keys. He kept walking. But something in his face changed, like someone who had just heard. Something gentle but surprising. The boy didn't see this. His eyes stayed on the keys. He wasn't thinking about who might be listening. He wasn't thinking about the people moving around him. He wasn't thinking about whether the music was good or not. He played because for a moment, the piano didn't feel like a test. It felt like a place where he could breathe. Little by little, a few people in the hall began to notice the sound. A woman carrying papers slowed her steps and looked toward the corner. A young volunteer stopped sweeping for a second, listening without meaning to. Even someone who was adjusting the stage lights glanced over his shoulder. The melody grew a little stronger, not louder, but more confident. The boy's fingers moved without hesitation now. His back straightened slightly, and the music filled more of the space than before. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't something he had prepared. It was simply a quiet moment that grew into something warm. The hall began to change, even though most people didn't realize it yet. The noise softened. Conversations lowered. A few people stopped what they were doing without saying why. A chair leg scraped gently across the floor. Then the room fell still again. The organizer walked back toward the piano once more. This time, he stood a few steps away, not wanting to disturb the boy. He watched his hands move with a smoothness that didn't match someone practicing or testing. The boy's expression was calm, almost peaceful, and it struck the organizer that he had never seen him like this before. Usually the boy kept his eyes down, his voice soft. But here, at the piano, he looked like someone who belonged. Still, the boy didn't know anyone was watching. He didn't know that the melody had begun pulling attention in the quietest way. He kept playing, unaware that the hall's atmosphere had shifted around him. Time passed without him realizing it. The melody slowed, drifting into quieter notes, like a soft ending to a story. He let the final notes fade gently before lifting his hands. The moment the sound stopped, he felt the weight of silence around him. A different kind of silence. One that wasn't empty, but full. As if the air itself was holding its breath. He blinked and looked up. A few people were staring at him. Not in a harsh way, not with shock, but with a kind of soft surprise. The organizer gave him a small, warm smile, the kind of smile that says more than words. The boy didn't know what to say. He hadn't meant to play more than a test. He felt a bit shy, unsure of what he should do next. He placed his hands on his lap and looked down again, wishing he hadn't drawn attention. But no one said anything right away. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the room was slowly waking up from something gentle. A woman near the stage said quietly that the piano sounded beautiful. Another person nodded without taking their eyes off him. The organizer stepped closer and asked if he often played like that. His voice was calm and kind. The boy hesitated before answering, saying he usually played only at home. The organizer nodded. Like he understood everything the boy wasn't saying, he thanked the boy for testing the piano. But the way he said it carried a deeper meaning. It wasn't a casual thank you. It carried respect. The boy stood up from the bench slowly. He didn't know what the others thought. He didn't know that his quiet melody had shifted something in the room. He only knew that he had done something small, something he hadn't planned. But the room remained softer after he stood a different kind of quiet. One that wasn't there before. The sound of the melody stayed in the air, even after the notes had faded. He walked back to his tasks, feeling shy but lighter somehow. The piano sat behind him, silent once again, but it no longer looked ordinary. It felt like he had left a small part of himself there without meaning to, and though he didn't know it yet. That simple moment at the piano would soon turn into something much bigger, something he never expected when he first sat down to test a few keys. The quiet moment that had filled the hall earlier stayed in the air long after the boy had stepped away from the piano. People went back to their tasks, but something about the room felt different now. It was hard for anyone to explain. The light seemed a little warmer, the noise a little softer. And the piano in the corner no longer looked like an old piece of furniture. It felt like a part of the place had woken up. The boy kept working, trying not to think too much about what had happened. He placed programs neatly on the chairs, one by one, focusing on keeping the stacks straight. Whenever he looked up, he noticed a few people glancing his way. He didn't know how to react to that. He wasn't used to being noticed. Usually people didn't remember him unless they needed someone quiet and responsible to help. He liked it that way, or at least he told himself he did. But now, something inside him felt unsettled. Not in a bad way, more like something new had taken root. He didn't know whether to ignore it or listen to it. He tried to distract himself, but his ears kept picking up small bits of conversation. He plays nicely. Ah, boy. Did you hear that music? I didn't know he could play. He tried pretending he didn't hear any of it. A little later, when the chairs had been arranged and the lights were properly adjusted, people started to leave. The hall would officially open the next day, and everything looked ready. The organizer walked around, checking things one last time. When he reached the center of the hall, he found the boy putting away leftover tape and paper. "You did good work today," the organizer said gently. The boy nodded and said thank you in a small voice. "And the piano." "That was something special," the man added. The boy froze for a second. He didn't know if he should smile or apologize. He chose neither. He just lowered his eyes and shrugged like it was nothing. "I didn't mean to distract anyone," he said quietly. "You didn't," the organizer replied. "You brought a little calm to the room? That's a rare thing." The boy didn't know what to answer, so he simply nodded again. The organizer didn't push the conversation further. He just gave the boy a warm smile before walking away. When the boy left the hall, the sky outside was turning orange. The sun was lowering behind some buildings, and the street looked peaceful. He walked home slowly, thinking about the piano. He didn't understand why his hands had moved the way they did. He hadn't planned to play more than a few notes. He wondered if he had made a mistake, if he had done something he shouldn't have. When he reached home, the place was quiet. He went to his small room, where his old keyboard sat near the window. It had a few keys that didn't sound right, but it was enough for him. He sat down and played a small part of the melody he had played earlier in the hall. The notes didn't sound the same, they were weaker. Duller but still familiar. For a moment he tried to understand why it felt different at the hall. Maybe it was the bigger piano. Maybe it was the silence around him. Maybe it was because he wasn't thinking too much at the time. Whatever it was, he felt something shift inside, like something had opened up and now refused to close again. He played for a few minutes, slowly and quietly. He didn't play to practice. He played to feel something he could not explain. The next morning, he returned to the hall early again. The event was supposed to start in a couple of hours, but volunteers were already arriving. The boy helped carry boxes, arrange signs, and check the stage equipment. People greeted him more warmly than usual, and he noticed it right away. A few smiled at him with knowing expressions. Someone even said, "Looking forward to hearing more music today." And he almost tripped over his own feet when he heard it. He didn't know how to answer. He hadn't planned to play again. He didn't even think he would go near the piano today. He was there to help, not to perform. But the piano stood in its corner, sunlight from the windows touching its wooden surface. It almost looked like it was waiting. As more people arrived, the noise grew louder. Chairs scraped, bags rustled, footsteps echoed across the hall. The boy kept himself busy, staying away from the piano. Every time he passed by it, though, he felt something pull at him. It wasn't pressure from others. It was something inside him. Later, while carrying a stack of folders across the hall, he noticed a group of visitors entering. They looked around the room with curious eyes, talking softly among themselves. A few children ran to the stage area, laughing. One of them pressed a random key on the piano, before being called back by an adult. The boy placed the folders on a table and took a step back. He watched as people started to settle. A voice from the stage announced that the event would begin soon, and everyone slowly moved to their seats. The organizer approached him again. "You know," he said in a thoughtful tone, "the piano hasn't sounded that warm in a long time." The boy quietly looked at the floor. "You don't have to play if you don't want to," the organizer added. "But if you ever feel like it, the piano is there." The boy nodded, unsure how to respond. As the event went on, speakers came on stage one by one. People clapped politely between segments. The boy listened from the side of the hall while continuing small tasks, but he couldn't stop glancing at the piano. A break was announced. People stood up to stretch, talk, and walk around. The hall filled with soft voices and light footsteps. The boy found himself drifting toward the piano without meaning to. He wasn't thinking about playing, he just ended up there. He touched the edge of the bench with his fingers, then pulled his hand back quickly. He stood there for a long moment, thinking about how quiet the hall had become again. Not silent, but calmer than before. He sat down. Not to play, at least, that's what he told himself. He just sat. The keys were right in front of him. His reflection, faint and blurred, appeared on the polished surface above the keys. He could see the shape of his own uncertainty. People around the hall were still talking. No one was paying attention to him. He pressed a single note. It rang gently. He pressed another, then two together. The sound felt familiar again, like a friend he had missed. Before he could think about what he was doing, his fingers began to move. It wasn't the full melody this time, just pieces of it, small fragments that came naturally. The notes blended softly, flowing like water. A couple nearby turned their heads slightly. A child paused mid-step. Someone further away put down their cup of tea slowly. The boy didn't notice. He was too focused on the keys. He added more notes, letting his hands find their way. The tune grew fuller, weaving into something gentle and warm. His posture changed again. Without him realizing, his back straightened, his shoulders loosened, and his hands moved with confidence. The hall continued to quiet down. One person stopped talking. Another stopped walking. A group near the back turned their heads toward him. Still, the boy played. The air seemed to shift again, just like the previous day. This time, more people were present to feel it. The soft melody wrapped itself around the room, touching each corner and filling it with something peaceful. More heads turned. More conversations faded. Someone whispered, "It's him again," in a tone filled with gentle surprise. The boy didn't hear it. He kept playing, each note carrying a piece of the quiet world he lived in when his hands touched the keys. The melody grew clearer, stronger, but never loud. It was the kind of sound that made people stop without knowing why. As the tune flowed, the show organizers paused backstage, listening with still hands. A woman carrying papers held them against her chest, as if afraid the sound of them shifting might disturb the moment. The boy finally reached the soft part of the melody. His fingers slowed, touching the keys with a tenderness that made the air feel delicate. It was as if he was telling the piano a secret, not realizing that the room was listening. When he played the final note, it lingered for a moment before fading gently into the hall. The boy's hands rested on the keys. He lifted them slowly. Then he heard it. The softest kind of silence. The kind that comes when people are afraid to break a moment too beautiful to disturb. He blinked and turned. Slightly, almost the whole room was looking at him, not with shock, not with judgment, not with expectation, but with quiet awe. The boy felt his heart beat faster. He hadn't meant to draw a crowd. He hadn't meant to play for anyone. His face warmed with embarrassment, but something inside him felt strangely light. Before anyone could approach him, he stood up quickly from the bench. He stepped back, as if he had done something wrong. But the room stayed silent. Not a heavy silence. A soft one. A warm one, and without knowing it. The boy had taken the first step into something new. Something he didn't yet understand, but would soon face. A simple request. To test a piano had turned into a moment no one expected, and it was only the beginning. The boy stood near the side of the hall, his hands still warm from touching the piano keys. He tried to blend into the small crowd, hoping people would stop looking at him. But even though the event slowly returned to its schedule, something had changed in the room. The sound of his melody still seemed to float in the air, like it hadn't fully faded away. People spoke more softly than before. Even when they moved around, their steps felt lighter, as if they didn't want to disturb whatever calmness had been created. The boy felt the shift but didn't know what to do with it. He kept his eyes down and focused on simple tasks, but every now and then, someone would glance his way with a gentle smile or a curious expression. He wasn't used to attention, and it made him nervous. At the same time, there was a small part of him that felt something else, something he didn't want to admit. It felt good. Not the kind of good that came from praise, but the good that came from being seen without being judged. During the next break in the program, a few people approached him. They didn't crowd him or speak loudly. One person thanked him softly for the music. Another told him the piano hadn't sounded that warm in years. A child said the melody made them feel calm. All of these words felt strange to the boy. He didn't know how to answer, so he only nodded and offered small, quiet replies. The organizer approached him again. He didn't ask the boy to play. He didn't need to. His gentle smile said everything. The boy dipped his head politely, unsure if he should leave or stay as the event stretched into the afternoon. People continued to ask about the music. The boy never tried to explain where he had learned, because he didn't know how to describe it. He never had formal lessons outside a few basic ones when he was younger. Most of what he played came from hours of listening, trying, making mistakes, and slowly discovering what sounded right. When the crowd finally thinned, he walked toward the hallway near the entrance. He wanted some space to breathe, and the small echo of the quiet corridor felt comforting. A window there showed a bit of the outside world, the street, the sky, and the slow movement of cars. He stood there for a while, letting his mind settle. He thought about the piano, about the way people watched him, about the feeling in his chest when he played. He didn't know if it was fear or excitement. Maybe it was both. After he calmed himself, he returned to the hall. They were preparing a short section for guests to explore different activities, and the piano was not part of that plan. He felt relieved for a moment, thinking the attention would naturally fade. But something unexpected happened. A speaker on stage asked anyone who wanted to share a talent, story, or message to step forward after the break. It was supposed to be a light, open segment. People laughed and clapped, amused by the idea. Some whispered about reading a poem or telling a funny story. The boy didn't think much of it. He certainly didn't plan to join, but when the break ended and the open segment began, something surprising took place. A woman stood up and said, "I think the young boy who played the piano earlier should come up again." The boy froze. The organizer looked around carefully, then tried to ease the pressure. "Only if he wants to," he said quickly. People nodded. It wasn't a forced request. It was an invitation, gentle, respectful, but filled with curiosity. The boy felt his stomach twist. He looked at the piano, then at the people, then back at the piano. He didn't move. He didn't know if he should go. His legs felt heavy. His heart felt louder than the room. The organizer gave him a soft nod, encouraging, but not pushy. Still, the boy stayed where he was. Someone else went on stage and shared a short, funny story. The room laughed. Another person read a poem about seasons. People listened kindly. A small group clapped softly for each person who came forward. The atmosphere was warm and supportive, but even while others took the microphone, many eyes gently drifted toward the boy every now and then. Not in a demanding way, not in a harsh way, but as if they hoped just a little that he might come forward. He didn't know why they cared. He didn't know why he mattered in that moment. He didn't know why the piano felt like it was calling him by the time the open segment ended. He still hadn't moved. He stayed in the same place, quietly watching. But something inside him felt heavy with regret, not because he didn't perform, but because he knew he had held himself back out of fear. The event continued with its normal schedule. The boy distracted himself with more volunteer work. He helped stack chairs, carried boxes, and gave directions to guests. But no matter what he was doing, small thoughts drifted into his mind. What if I had gone up? Would it have been terrible? Would people have disliked it? Or would they have listened? The questions bothered him more than he expected, as the event neared its end. The sun began to sink lower outside the windows. The warm orange light filled the hall again, just like the previous day. People began gathering their belongings, chatting, saying goodbyes. The boy walked to a corner to collect some items that needed packing. He noticed the organizer standing near the piano, wiping its wooden surface gently with a cloth, like someone taking care of something precious. The organizer spotted him and waved him over. "You did something meaningful today?" the man said softly. The boy shook his head. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "You shared a part of yourself without saying a word," the man said. "That's not nothing." The boy looked at the piano, then at the man. "Why did they listen?" he asked quietly. "Because the music was honest," the man replied. "And because you didn't play to impress anyone. You played to express something." The boy didn't know how to respond to that. He hadn't thought of it that way. "You don't have to perform if you're not ready," the organizer added. "But I hope you know the door is open. People want to hear you not because they expect something big, but because they want to hear you. That's enough." The boy looked at the piano, then at the man. "Why did they listen?" he asked quietly. "Because the music was honest," the man replied. "And because you didn't play to impress anyone. You played to express something." The boy didn't know how to respond to that. He hadn't thought of it that way. "You don't have to perform if you're not ready," the organizer added. "But I hope you know the door is open. People want to hear you not because they expect something big, but because your music made them feel something. That sentence stayed with him when the event finally ended, and most people had left. The hall grew quiet again. The boy helped with the final cleaning until only a few volunteers remained. The organizer thanked everyone and told them they could go home. The boy started toward the exit, but stopped. He turned his head toward the piano. It sat there in the warm light, silent and still, as if waiting patiently. He looked around. Only 2 volunteers were stacking chairs on the far side. They weren't paying attention. The organizer was near the entrance, busy locking up some equipment. The boy walked slowly toward the piano. He sat down. He didn't play the full melody this time. He played only a small, gentle pattern, the same few notes he would play when he needed to clear his mind. The sound filled the empty hall softly. It felt different this time, not because of who might be listening, but because of what he felt. He realized something. Playing in front of people scared him, but not playing felt even worse. He touched the keys again. A soft note rang out. He wanted to share something more. Not today. Not in a big moment. But someday soon. As he stood up from the bench, a quiet promise formed in his heart, when he didn't speak aloud, but one he felt deeply. If he ever got another chance to play in front of people, he wouldn't run from it. He walked to the entrance, where the organizer smiled at him again. "See you tomorrow?" the man asked. The boy nodded double quotes. "Yes," he said softly. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, he sensed that something was beginning to change. Not in the world. Inside him, and he didn't know it yet. But the next day would bring a moment even bigger than the last one that no one, not even he himself, could have predicted. The simple melody he had played had set something in motion. And now, without meaning to, he was stepping toward a performance no one saw coming. The next morning arrived quietly, with a soft gray sky and a cool breeze that slipped through the cracked window of the small practice room. He had hardly slept. His mind kept replaying everything that had happened the previous day. The unexpected silence in the room, the way people looked at him afterward, and most of all, the strange mix of relief and fear that came with finally being seen. For years he had stayed in the background, almost invisible, doing just enough to get through each day. But now things were changing, and the change felt both exciting and frightening at the same time. He woke up early, long before anyone else usually came into the music center. The building was still quiet when he entered, as if it hadn't fully woken up either. The hallways were empty, except for the sound of his footsteps. He went straight to the practice room where he had spent most of his time. It still smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and the piano was sitting exactly where he left it the night before. He placed his bag on the floor and sat down slowly on the bench, letting his fingers hover over the keys. He wasn't sure why he had come so early. Maybe he hoped that playing again would help him understand why yesterday had felt so different. Maybe he wanted to see if that spark he felt was real or just something that happened in the moment. Or maybe he simply didn't want to face the possibility that it had all been a one-time thing. He pressed a single key. The soft sound echoed faintly in the empty room. It made him smile a little, even though he wasn't sure why. For a moment, he just let his hands rest there. He didn't want to rush the feeling or force anything to happen. He needed to let the day settle into itself. As he sat there, he remembered the surprised faces in the room, the staff, the students, even the man who had casually asked him to play the difficult song. No one had expected anything from him. It was strange to realize how invisible he had been all this time. Most of the people at the center probably didn't know his name. He had never talked much, and he usually kept his head down. But yesterday, for the first time, he wasn't invisible. He took a deep breath and began to play a simple tune he used to practice when he was much younger. It was not a showy piece, and it didn't require much skill, but it was something that made him feel calm. It reminded him of the first time he discovered that the piano could make him feel safe. Back then, he would sit in a small room in his old house and play until the light faded. Trying to copy melodies he heard in old songs, it was his escape, his own little world. While he played, he didn't notice the door slowly open. He didn't hear the soft footsteps coming inside, but he did sense a movement behind him, and when he turned his head slightly, he saw a familiar face standing near the door. It was the same instructor who had watched him play the challenging song the day before. She walked a little closer, but kept her voice soft so she wouldn't break his focus. "You're here early," she said. He nodded shyly and stopped playing, placing his hands in his lap. "I just wanted to practice." "You play beautifully," she said simply. Yesterday wasn't an accident. He didn't know what to say. Compliments still felt strange to him. He was used to being overlooked, not praised. He looked down at the keys. She continued, her tone still gentle, but more serious now. "The director wants to see you later today. Don't worry, it's nothing bad. He just wants to talk about your performance." His heartbeat sped up. The director almost never called students unless something major happened. He swallowed hard. "Did I do something wrong?" She shook her head quickly. "No, not at all. Just go with an open mind." After she left, the room felt different. It wasn't the comfortable quiet he enjoyed before. Now there was a slight pressure in the air, a nervous energy he couldn't shake. He tried to practice again, but his hands didn't move as easily. His thoughts kept drifting to the upcoming meeting. What could the director possibly want from him? Why now? Why, after all these months of silence and routine? As the morning went on, more students arrived at the center. The hallways filled with chatter and laughter. For the first time, a few of them looked at him as they passed by. Some even smiled or nodded, something that had never happened before. He felt uncomfortable with the attention, but there was also a small part of him that enjoyed the warmth of it. He stayed mostly in the practice room, trying to keep to himself. Around midday, a staff member came to get him. "The director is ready for you," the man said. He stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and followed him down the hallway. The director's office was at the end of a long corridor filled with old framed photos of past performers and competitions. He had walked past them countless times, but had never stopped to really look at them. Today, however, he noticed something different. The faces on the wall weren't just pictures. They represented people who had once been exactly where he was, now unknown, unsure and full of quiet potential. The staff member knocked lightly, then opened the door. "He's here," he said, before stepping aside. The director sat behind a large wooden desk covered with paperwork. He was a serious-looking man, but he smiled when he saw him enter. "Come in," he said, waving him forward. "Please, sit." He sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the director's eyes studying him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The director seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "You surprised us yesterday," the director finally said. "In a good way. Very few students can play that piece the way you did. Your technique, your control, your expression. It was remarkable." He looked down again, unsure how to respond. "I just practiced a lot," he said quietly. "That much is clear," the director said with a small smile. "But practice alone doesn't explain everything. You have something special, something that can't be taught." He shifted in his seat. Compliments still made him nervous. "I want to offer you something," the director continued. "A place in the advanced program. It's a small group of students who receive special training, performance opportunities, and guidance. It's more demanding, but it could open many doors for you." The words hit him harder than he expected. The advanced program? Him. He had seen the students in that group. They were confident, talented, and always in the spotlight. He had never imagined himself being part of them. "I don't know," he said softly. "I don't think I'm ready," the director leaned forward. "No one ever feels ready at first. But you've already shown that you belong there. You just need to trust it." He didn't respond right away. His mind was racing. What if he failed? What if he disappointed everyone? What if yesterday really was just luck? The director noticed his hesitation. "Take some time to think," he said calmly. "You don't have to answer today, but don't underestimate yourself." He nodded quietly and stood up to leave, still dazed by the conversation. When he stepped back into the hallway, everything felt slightly unreal. It was as if the ground beneath him had shifted. All this time, he had been living in the shadow of his own doubt. But now, Someone had opened a door when he had never dared to approach. He walked slowly through the building, trying to process everything. A few students nodded at him again. Some whispered quietly, probably discussing him. He wasn't used to being the subject of conversations, and it made him feel exposed. But it also made him feel alive. He went back to the practice room and sat in front of the piano again. He didn't play right away. Instead, he stared at the keys, thinking about everything the director said. Could he really do it? Could he step out of the background and into a place where people expected something from him? The thought scared him, but it also stirred something hopeful inside him. He placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Then he began to play not the simple tune from before, but something new. Something that came from a place he had never allowed himself to explore. The music filled the room softly at first, then grew stronger, richer. It felt like he was pouring out all the fear, all the hope, all the confusion and excitement tangled together. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As he played, he realized something important. Maybe the advanced program wasn't something he had to fear. Maybe it was a chance to finally grow, to finally be seen not by accident, but by choice. When he finished, he sat quietly, breathing deeply. The room felt different now, lighter. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would succeed or fail. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to take a step forward. And that was enough for now. The day of the performance arrived with a quiet sort of tension in the air, the kind that sits gently on the shoulders but never quite lets go. He woke earlier than usual, long before the sun started to climb into the sky. The faint light coming through the curtains painted soft shapes on the walls. And he lay still for a moment, trying to calm the storm of thoughts inside him. Today wasn't just any day. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of something completely new. He got ready slowly, carefully choosing every small thing he needed to bring. The music sheets, though, he wasn't sure he would use them. A simple water bottle, a small cloth to clean the keys if he needed to. These things felt almost silly when he thought about them, but they gave him comfort. He liked having something to hold on to. On his way to the music center, the streets were still mostly empty. The early morning air felt cool against his skin, and he tried to breathe deeply, hoping it would help settle his nerves. He wasn't used to being at the center of attention. Even after the past week, even after the unexpected changes, he still didn't feel like someone who belonged in the spotlight. But he also knew he couldn't go back to hiding in the corners like he used to. Something inside him had shifted, pretending otherwise wasn't possible anymore. When he reached the building, the doors were already open. A few staff members were walking around preparing for the event. They greeted him warmly, something that still surprised him. He returned the gestures shyly but sincerely. He felt different walking through the hallway now. Not more important, just more present. He went straight to the small practice room where he had spent so many hours. The room felt familiar in a way nothing else did. The piano stood quietly in the middle, almost as if it had been waiting for him. He put his things down, sat on the bench, and gently touched the keys. They felt cool under his fingers, steady and reliable. He didn't play the entire piece he was supposed to perform. Instead, he played little parts of it, small sections that helped his fingers warm up. But he didn't overdo it. He knew himself well enough to understand that practicing too much right before a performance made him more anxious. While he was practicing, someone knocked lightly on the door. He turned to see the instructor standing there. It's the same one who had believed in him from the beginning. "It's almost time," she said kindly. He nodded and stood up slowly. His legs felt a little weak, but he took a deep breath and steadied himself. Before leaving, he gave the piano one last gentle touch, as if thanking it for everything. The hallway outside the practice room was busier now. Students and visitors walked around, some excited, some nervous. The building felt alive in a way it didn't on regular days. He followed the instructor toward the performance hall, trying to stay calm. Every step brought a stronger awareness of what he was about to do. When they reached the backstage area, he heard the soft hum of the audience already seated. The sound made his heart pound faster. He wasn't used to performing in front of so many people. The advanced program students were already there, warming up quietly or murmuring among themselves. Some of them nodded at him in greeting. A few even wished him luck. He appreciated it, though he wasn't sure how to respond beyond a small smile. The instructor placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're here because you deserve to be," she said softly. "Remember that." Her words meant more than she realized. Soon the director appeared, giving instructions and checking that everything was running smoothly. When he approached him, he offered a warm, encouraging smile. "Ready?" the director asked. He swallowed hard but nodded. "I think so." "That's enough," the director said. "Just play with honesty. That's what made your performance stand out in the first place." When his turn finally came, he stepped toward the stage with slow, careful steps. The light from the hall spilled into the backstage area, bright and warm. As he walked onto the stage, the audience grew quiet. He could hear the soft rustle of clothes, the shifting of people settling into their seats, the faint breaths of anticipation. He sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench slightly, and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he didn't move. He let the silence settle around him. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but for the first time it didn't scare him as much as it used to. Instead, it reminded him of how far he had come. He took one more deep breath and began to play. The first notes floated through the hall like a quiet whisper, gentle but full of feeling. He didn't rush. He didn't force anything. He let the music grow naturally, the way it always did when he was alone. Soon, the melody grew stronger, deeper, carrying all the emotions he had been holding inside for years. He played with honesty, just like the director had told him. Every key he pressed felt like a piece of his story's small moments of loneliness, long hours of practice when no one was watching, the fear of being unseen, and the new warmth of being recognized. The music wasn't perfect, but it was real. It carried everything he had learned and everything he hoped to become. At some point, he forgot about the audience. He forgot about the pressure, the expectations, the worries. It was just him and the music, the way it had always been. The hall seemed to fade away, replaced by a feeling that he couldn't explain. A feeling of freedom when he reached the final notes. He held them gently, letting the sound linger before fading away. Then the hall fell completely silent. For a moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake, if the audience didn't understand what he was trying to share. But then a single clap echoed through the hall, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause, strong, warm, and overwhelming. He sat there, stunned. His chest tightened, and his eyes stung with emotion he tried to hide. It was the kind of applause he had never imagined receiving, the kind he didn't think he was worthy of. But now it surrounded him, filling the space with something he had never felt before. When he stood up, he bowed deeply, trying to hold on to the moment without letting it swallow him. As he lifted his head, he saw the instructor smiling, the director clapping proudly, and even some of the advanced students nodding with genuine respect. He walked off the stage slowly, still feeling the echo of the applause behind him. The backstage area felt brighter, warmer somehow. People congratulated him as he passed, but their voices felt distant. His mind was still on the music, still floating in that peaceful place the performance had brought him. The instructor approached him first. "You did more than play well," she said. "You connected with everyone in that room." He looked down, shy but grateful. "Thank you," he whispered. The director joined them soon after. "I hope you understand now why we believed in you," he said. "This is just the beginning." He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. But deep inside, something felt different, stronger. Later, after the event ended and the crowd had left, he returned to the empty hall. The lights were dimmed now, and the quiet felt comforting. He approached the piano once more and placed his fingertips gently on the keys. It amazed him how much this instrument had changed his life, how many doors it had opened, how much courage it had given him when he had none. He didn't play this time. He just stood there, letting the silence settle around him. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, he felt ready for all of it. He walked outside, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against his face. The sky was turning a soft shade of blue and orange as the sun began to set. People were leaving the building, chatting happily, and he heard his name whispered here and there in warm tones. He smiled to himself. A small, quiet smile. A simple request at the piano had changed everything. A song he had once thought was meant for someone else became the moment that opened a new path for him. And now, as he stepped forward into the cool evening air, he knew this was only the beginning of a journey he had once been too afraid to dream about.